Science fiction has always promised to take us beyond the limits of imagination, but its costumes often drag us back into the fire of earthly outrage. From barely there, outfits that ignited moral panics, to designs accused of racism, sexism, or outright blasphemy.
I was destroyed when the movie was finished. I mean, you know, going for whatever it was, 7 months.
The wardrobe of sci-fi has long been a lightning rod for scandal. What some fans hail as visionary world-building, others condemn as cultural vandalism or shameless exploitation. These controversial costumes didn't just clothe characters, they remind us that what characters wear in far-off galaxies can cause just as much controversy as what's worn here on Earth. Join us as we take a look at costumes that have pushed the boundaries in Hollywood in sci-fi history. All about costumes. In science fiction, costumes are rarely just fabric, plastic, or metal stitched together for cinematic effect. They are visual statements that are sometimes daring or absurd and carry cultural weight far beyond the screen. While casual viewers may see a shimmering jumpsuit or a set of alien armor as simple world-building, these costumes often spark firestorms of debate about morality, sexuality, politics, and representation. Sci-fi, after all, has always been about more than spaceships and laser guns. It is a mirror for society's anxieties and ambitions, and nowhere is that mirror clearer than in the costumes its characters wear. Throughout the history of the genre, what characters wear has frequently become as controversial as what they do. From the earliest serials of the 1930s, where Flash Gordon's companions shocked audiences with skin-bearing outfits, to the 21st century debates over whether Seven of Nine's skin-tight uniform reduced her to an object, clothing in science fiction has consistently set off cultural clashes. Sometimes the outrage comes from audiences who see exploitation or indecency, perhaps from critics who accuse designers of glorifying fascism or trivializing trauma. At other times, the controversy arises from unintended consequences, such as a trench coat in The Matrix becoming linked to school shootings, or stormtrooper armor shifting from pulp villainy to political protest gear. The controversy often creates a paradox where sci-fi costumes are meant to look futuristic, fantastical, or otherworldly. Yet, audiences inevitably interpret them through the lens of the present values, fears, and cultural beliefs. A costume meant to showcase strength can be read as sexist pandering. An outfit designed as satire can be mistaken for propaganda. Even a simple piece of clothing can become a political flashpoint depending on the era in which it is worn. This makes the study of controversial costumes in sci-fi not just a quirky niche in film history, but a way of understanding how art collides with society. Before the internet, before fandom conventions, and before blockbuster budgets, science fiction often lived in a precarious balance between imagination and censorship. Film and television of the mid-20th century pushed boundaries carefully, sneaking futuristic visuals past conservative audiences. Costumes became the most visible battleground, and 3 major flashpoints defined the early history of controversy in the genre. Flash Gordon, pulp excess, and the birth of costume scandal. When Flash Gordon serials first hit screens in the 1930s, they introduced mainstream audiences to science fiction as a visual spectacle. Rocket ships and exotic planets were thrilling, but it was the costumes that drew the most attention. Princess Aura and other female characters often wore skimpy outfits complete with bare midriffs, plunging necklines, and sheer fabrics. This tested the limits of what censors would allow during Hollywood's Hays Code era. To modern viewers, these designs may seem tame compared to current standards, but in the 30s, exposed shoulders could raise eyebrows, and the visuals were shocking. Religious groups condemned the films as indecent, while others accused them of corrupting children, who were the primary audience for serialized movie shows. What makes Flash Gordon significant is that it marked the first time sci-fi clothing became part of a moral panic. These costumes weren't only provocative, they symbolized the tension between pulp fantasy and societal conservatism. The controversy revealed a problem that would haunt the genre for decades. Sci-fi was supposed to show audiences the future, but it could only do so within the boundaries of the present. Uhura's miniskirt? A progressive icon or sexualized officer? 3 decades later, Star Trek, the original series, found itself at the center of a similar controversy. Lieutenant Uhura, played by Nichelle Nichols, wore the now iconic Starfleet miniskirt uniform. To some, this was a powerful image of progress showing a black woman in a respected role on a spaceship bridge, working as an officer in an integrated future. Nichols herself described the role as groundbreaking and famously stayed on the show after encouragement from Martin Luther King Jr., who recognized the symbolic importance of her presence. Yet the miniskirt was not without its critics. Feminist groups in the 1960s questioned why female officers wore short, revealing skirts while men wore practical pants. Was this really a vision of equality in the 23rd century, or a reminder of the 1960s sexism disguised as futurism? Nichols defended the uniform as fashionable and empowering, but the criticism stuck, becoming a focal point in debates about how much Star Trek reflected progress versus how much it reinforced old stereotypes. The Uhura costume controversy was especially significant because it cut both ways. For many, the uniform was liberating and a symbol of racial progress, female strength, and modern style. For others, it was evidence that women in science fiction were still being objectified for ratings. This duality continues to define how audiences interpret sci-fi costumes as symbols of liberation or just new forms of exploitation. Barbarella, sci-fi meets the sexual revolution. If Flash Gordon tiptoed around the scandal and Star Trek straddled the line, Barbarella leapt headfirst into the controversy. Directed by Roger Vadim and starring Jane Fonda, the film is remembered less for its plot and more for its costumes or lack thereof. Barbarella's outfits were deliberately provocative, chock full of space lingerie, fetish-inspired boots, and in one infamous scene, a spacesuit that literally disintegrates striptease style. The film was released at the height of the sexual revolution, and its reception mirrored the cultural divide of the era. Some praised it as liberating, campy fun that embraced female sexuality without apology. Others condemned it as softcore pornography disguised as science fiction. Fonda herself was ambivalent, later calling the role both empowering and objectifying, depending on how one looked at it. The scandal of Barbarella showed how sci-fi costumes can be interpreted through the lens of cultural upheaval. What some audiences saw as a feminist embrace of sexual freedom, others saw as the ultimate male fantasy, a woman warrior who fights in lingerie. In many ways, Barbarella set the template for future debates between when sexual display is liberating versus being exploitative. These early costume controversies did more than shock audiences or anger censors, they set precedents. Sci-fi quickly became known as a genre where costumes pushed the boundaries of social norms, often forcing audiences to confront uncomfortable questions about gender, sexuality, and morality. As sci-fi movies continued rolling out and the debates grew even more diverse, one of the conversations that came up was whether the costumes simply catered to the male gaze or are symbols of freedom and confidence. Princess Leia's slave bikini, Return of the Jedi. Few costumes in cinema have had as much cultural impact or generated as much debate as Princess Leia's metal bikini in Return of the Jedi. According to the script, she was forced into the outfit by Jabba the Hutt after being captured, and appears in the scene chained, objectified, and stripped of her dignity. The image became an instant pop culture phenomenon, replicated endlessly in posters, parodies, and cosplay. The backlash was swift. Feminist critics argued that the bikini reduced Leia, who was previously shown as a strong leader and revolutionary, into a sexualized spectacle for the male audience. The fact that Leia causes Jabba's death while wearing the costume complicated the narrative further. Was this a triumph of empowerment, showing a woman strangling her abuser while in chains? Or was it simply exploitation dressed up as resistance? Even decades later, the debate rages. Some women who grew up with Leia's character view the bikini as an empowering symbol of resilience. Others see it as a betrayal of one of cinema's few iconic heroes. Disney's decision in the early 2000s to quietly retire the slave Leia merchandise showed how potent and unresolved the controversy remains. Carrie Fisher has been candid, often brutally so, about her feelings toward the infamous costume. Unlike many fans who saw it as an empowering moment, she frequently described the outfit as humiliating and deeply uncomfortable. She often joked that the metal bikini made it impossible to sit or move normally. She said the only way she could stay comfortable on set was by reclining horizontally between takes, since the costume offered no support. In interviews, she admitted it was both physically and emotionally awkward to wear. While Leia taking out Jabba was undeniably a powerful moment, she said that the empowerment was undercut by how she was dressed. In her memoir, The Princess Diarist, she described it as what supermodels will eventually wear in the seventh ring of hell. She expressed frustration with how obsessed certain fans became with the bikini. She joked about signing endless photos of it at conventions, but also bristled at how it seemed to overshadow the more important parts of Leia's character, like her leadership, courage, and sharp wit. She famously told Daisy Ridley, "Don't be a slave like I was." Later in life, she has leaned into the humor of it, using jokes to reclaim some agency. When asked how young fans should respond if someone objectifies them, she quipped, "Tell them that a giant slug made you wear that stupid outfit, and then you got rid of him for it." 7 of 9's catsuit, Star Trek Voyager. When Jerry Ryan joined Star Trek Voyager as 7 of 9, the show's ratings soared. A former Borg drone re-assimilating into humanity, 7 was one of the most complex characters in the franchise. Interestingly, it wasn't her story that initially drew headlines, it was her costume. The skin-tight silver catsuit was deliberately designed to accentuate her figure, and many critics saw it as a cynical attempt to boost ratings through sex appeal. Behind the scenes, she revealed that the costume was physically punishing. The suit was so tight that she sometimes fainted on set, and she required assistance just to move comfortably. While fans celebrated 7 as an intelligent, powerful, and layered character, others argued that the catsuit undermined her credibility, reducing her to eye candy. Producers defended the design, claiming it symbolized 7's transition from Borg machinery to human individuality. But the controversy revealed a deeper truth about the franchise. While Star Trek has long been celebrated for progressive ideas, it has also leaned heavily on sexualized costuming to attract viewers. Lilu's bandage costume, The Fifth Element. Lilu's bandage costume in The Fifth Element is one of Sci-Fi's most recognizable fashion statements. This was a costume designed by haute couture legend Jean-Paul Gaultier, constructed from strips of white fabric that barely cover the body. The outfit was immediately deemed futuristic, high fashion, and undeniably sexual at the time. For some, the costume represented innovation, blending couture with sci-fi in a way that elevated the genre. For others, it was a blatant example of fetishization, reducing Mila Jovovich's character to a male fantasy. Lilu herself is portrayed as powerful, nearly divine, and central to saving humanity. But her clothing sparked a persistent question. Why must the savior of humanity be dressed like a lingerie model? The Fifth Element has been re-examined in light of allegations about director Luc Besson's treatment of women, making the bandage costume even more chaotic. Mila Jovovich has said she actually enjoyed the uniqueness of Jean-Paul Gaultier's design. She described the costume as playful, avant-garde, and fun to wear, though she admitted it was impractical and left her feeling half-naked on set most of the time. She argued that Lilu's power came from her personality and role in the story, not her clothing. She defended the costume by pointing out that Lilu was the savior of humanity, the supreme being. However, in more recent years, with greater scrutiny on his reputation and treatment of women, the context of her comments has been re-examined. Aeon Flux's fetish wear. Aeon Flux, what was originally an MTV animated series before becoming a 2005 live-action film starring Charlize Theron, pushed boundaries in its depiction of futuristic sexuality. The title character's costumes were inspired by bondage and fetish gear. The animated series provoked parental outrage in the 90s, while the film attempted to tone down the most provocative designs, but still faced criticism. Charlize herself admitted the costumes were impractical and uncomfortable, and critics accused the filmmakers of diluting the avant-garde style of the original series while still over-sexualizing the heroes. The result was a lose-lose, too tame for fans of the cartoon, too provocative for mainstream critics. Not all controversial sci-fi costumes were meant to be sexy or symbolic. Some became infamous simply because they were so outrageous, so camp, or so jarring that audiences didn't know how to react. In certain cases, the controversy wasn't just about what the costume looked like, it was about whether the filmmakers even understood how absurd it was. At times, these designs were intentional satire, and at other times, they veered so far into camp that they undermined their own films. Sean Connery's red Speedo, Zardoz. If there were an award for the most ridiculed sci-fi costume in history, Sean Connery's outfit in Zardoz would win easily. Cast as a brutal warrior in John Boorman's surreal film, Sean spends most of his screen time wearing what can only be described as a red diaper like mankini, thigh-high boots, and an ammunition belt that crosses his bare chest. At the time, he was only 2 years removed from playing James Bond, so the contrast was shocking. Fans expecting suave sophistication were instead confronted with a half-naked Sean, striding around in what looked like a parody of macho toughness. Critics mocked the design as absurd, while audiences couldn't take the character seriously. Decades later, the image has become an internet meme, endlessly recycled as one of the most baffling wardrobe choices in cinema. And yet, in its own way, the costume has endured. Some defenders argue that it was meant to be a grotesque satire, a visual metaphor for a collapsing society where gender, class, and authority were all distorted. Whether satire or just a miscalculation, his mankini remains one of the strangest and most controversial costumes ever put on film. Sean Connery himself had plenty to say about that notorious Zardoz red mankini. His opinions are fascinating because he was both embarrassed by it and defensive of why he took the role. After leaving James Bond behind in the early 1970s, he found it difficult to secure work. In interviews, he admitted that the Bond image had typecast him. John Boorman's Zardoz offered him something radically different, a chance to prove he could play strange, surreal characters far outside the suave, tuxedo-clad Bond mold. He acknowledged that the skimpy red outfit was bizarre, even ridiculous, but he argued that it fit the story. Sting's winged codpiece, Dune. David Lynch's adaptation of Dune was already a divisive film, but one of its most infamous moments came when Sting, playing Feyd-Rautha, emerged in a futuristic winged codpiece. Intended to showcase the character's arrogance and decadence, the costume instead became a distraction. Critics openly laughed at the scene, and it became one of the most mocked elements of the film. Even today, the codpiece is remembered less as a bold character choice and more as an example of sci-fi excess gone wrong. The controversy here wasn't about indecency, it was about credibility. Instead of adding to the drama, the costume turned a supposed villainous moment into unintentional comedy. In a story as complex and political as Dune, the visual absurdity of the codpiece went contrary to the film's seriousness. Sting's take on his infamous Dune codpiece is almost as entertaining as the costume itself. Unlike Sean Connery, who was half defensive about Zardoz, he leaned into the absurdity. He admitted he found the winged codpiece both hilarious and slightly embarrassing. In one interview, he joked that he didn't even realize how revealing it was until he saw the dailies, and by then, it was too late. He later called it the most ridiculous thing I've ever worn on screen. He acknowledged that Lynch and the producers wanted Feyd-Rautha's entrance to be shocking, decadent, and sensual, and he understood that casting a rock star in a skimpy costume was part of that. But he also laughed at how camp the result was. He once added, "It wasn't menacing, it was pantomime." He has said he was surprised that his outfit overshadowed the character. Fans rarely ask him about Feyd's motives or the Dune universe. Instead, they ask about the codpiece. He seems amused by it rather than annoyed, often poking fun at how it turned into a cult joke, but still expresses pride in being part of Lynch's Dune, despite its flaws. He recognizes that his costume became a symbol of the film's excess and strangeness, but he doesn't seem to mind. If anything, he seems to enjoy that people still talk about it decades later. Nazi-inspired uniforms, Starship Troopers. Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers used costume design as pointed satire. The film's military uniforms and propaganda outfits were deliberately modeled after Nazi aesthetics, with their sharp lines, dark leather, and authoritarian insignia. The intention was clear. He wanted audiences to recognize the fascist undertones of militarism and blind patriotism. The problem was, not everyone got the joke. Many viewers, particularly in the US, took the uniforms at face value, interpreting them as cool and stylish, rather than as biting parody. Critics were divided as some hailed the film as a brilliant satire, while others accused it of glorifying fascism. The uniforms, designed to highlight the absurdity of authoritarian imagery, instead became dangerously attractive to some audiences. This incident demonstrated the risk of satire through costume. While the intent was to provoke discomfort, the design was so effective that it blurred the line between critique and endorsement. To this day, debates continue about whether Starship Troopers succeeded as satire or whether its Nazi-inspired costumes sent the wrong message. For the cast of Starship Troopers, the iconic uniforms were both a practical burden and a symbolic statement. Casper Van Dien, who played Johnny Rico, recalled how heavy and stifling the gear became during grueling desert shoots, with some actors fainting under the weight. Yet he defended the design as essential to Paul Verhoeven's satirical vision. Dina Meyer, who played Dizzy Flores, described the costumes as restrictive and uncomfortable for stunts. but admitted they did create a genuine sense of military discipline, reinforcing the authoritarian edge Paul wanted. Denise Richards echoed the physical challenges, noting how difficult it was to keep the uniforms clean and intact, and admitted she only realized the full force of their Nazi-inspired aesthetic once she saw the completed film. Neil Patrick Harris, who wore the most overtly fascist outfit, an SS-style black leather coat and cap, later reflected on the surreal experience of dressing like that, admitting the design was pretty on the nose, but in keeping with Paul's intention to make the satire unmistakable. Still, the actors understood that the uniforms were supposed to be unsettling, a critique of militarism disguised as glamour, though many have since expressed a kind of wary amusement at how often fans misinterpreted them as simply badass. The neon bodysuits, Tron. When Tron was released in 1982, its glowing bodysuits were cutting edge, blending costume design with then experimental computer graphics. The reception was mixed. Some hailed the look as futuristic and groundbreaking, while others found the skin-tight designs uncomfortably revealing. In certain markets, censors even questioned whether the costumes were obscene, as the glowing outlines emphasized the contours of the body in ways traditional Hollywood costumes did not. The controversy around Tron was less moral and more cultural. Mainstream audiences weren't yet accustomed to the aesthetics of digital design, and the costumes struck some as alien and unsettling. What looked innovative to a sci-fi fan could look indecent or ridiculous to a casual viewer. Today, the Tron suits are recognized as iconic and influential, inspiring everything from music videos to modern gaming aesthetics. But in 1982, they represented a costume scandal rooted not in sexuality or politics, but in the shock of encountering something radically new. The cast of Tron likewise had mixed feelings about the film's groundbreaking illuminated bodysuits. Jeff Bridges, who played Kevin Flynn, often joked that the costumes made everyone look like human light bulbs, and admitted they were awkwardly revealing. But he praised their originality and the way they pushed cinema into new visual territory. Bruce Boxleitner, cast as Tron, described the suits as stiff, hot, and unflattering under the studio lights, though he acknowledged they gave the actors an otherworldly presence once the special effects were layered on. Cindy Morgan, who played Laura or Yori, said she felt self-conscious in the skin-tight outfit, which left little to the imagination, but defended the costumes as part of the bold experiment the film represented. All three later reflected that the suits, while uncomfortable and somewhat embarrassing on set, became iconic precisely because of their strangeness. What had felt alien and even indecent to early audiences eventually came to symbolize the birth of the digital age in cinema. The xenomorph suit, Alien. Ridley Scott's Alien introduced cinema to one of the most terrifying creature designs ever conceived, brought to life through H.R. Giger's biomechanical aesthetics and a full bodysuit worn by actor Bolaji Badiho. The controversy surrounding the costume wasn't about camp, but about its unsettling fusion of sexuality and monstrosity. Giger's design blurred the line between male and female anatomy, mixing phallic shapes with imagery reminiscent of pregnancy and violation. For many, the xenomorph suit was too disturbing precisely because it was so effective. It turned the alien body into a metaphor for sexual abuse, gestation, and the loss of bodily autonomy. Feminist critics seized on this imagery, arguing that the horror of Alien wasn't just about extraterrestrials. Neo's trench coat, The Matrix. At the turn of the millennium, Keanu Reeves's black trench coat in The Matrix became one of the most recognizable and controversial costumes in sci-fi history. On screen, the coat symbolized rebellion against conformity, blending cyberpunk aesthetics with religious overtones of the Chosen One. In 1999, Shortly after The Matrix premiered, the Columbine High School massacre was carried out by two shooters wearing trench coats. Though their choice of clothing predated the film, the public quickly connected the violence to Neo's wardrobe, with media outlets dubbing the killer's clique the Trenchcoat Mafia. Instead, it became the subject of moral panic, with parents, educators, and politicians blaming the movie's wardrobe for inspiring violence. What ties all these costumes together is shock value, whether intentional or accidental. These designs forced audiences to confront the limits of believability and taste. In some cases, they aged into camp classics, and in others, they remain symbols of miscalculation. In every case, they remind us that sci-fi costuming is a gamble on what may look visionary to one audience, but laughable, offensive, or even dangerous to another. What do you think of the costumes? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. To enjoy more exciting videos, click play on the video on your screen. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you get notified when a new video is released.